The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors. It's coming. All these voices.
My name is James Hershey. Right back. That ought to do it. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring Into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me as always is my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Good evening, misfits, sugar ladies, and demon hunters. I'm doing pretty good, brother. How you doing?
Tonight we are doing a very special lady. That's right, I said lady. You don't have very many female serial killers, but I chose this lady because she is the biggest and the baddest of all the female serial killers. I'm talking about the Blood Countess herself, Elizabeth Bathory. Now, Elizabeth Bathory is the most prolific female serial killer of all time. She's killed more people than anyone else. First off, let's do her stats. She was born on August 7th, 1560 in Hungary. She was born as a noblewoman into the Bathory family. She died on August 21st, 1614, when she was 54 years old. Her spouse was Ferenc Nadatsky. She had 4 children, Paul, Anna, Ursula, and Catherine. They were rumored to have one other child that died, but I can't confirm that. Okay, now for her stats as far as victims go. She killed over 650 people. Now, the reason I say over 650, and I don't have an exact number for you, is because nobody's quite sure how many she actually killed. We know it's at least 650 people. There were over 300 witnesses that gave testimony against her. Through their testimony, we're able to figure out how many she killed, and it's over 650. Some estimates go as far as into the thousands. Okay, so this woman killed a lot of people. She was actually caught December 29th, 1610. So she killed from sometime in 1590 all the way to 1610, basically, right till the end of 1610. Elizabeth was engaged very, very early in her life. During that time period, it was customary for women to get engaged and get married at a very, very young age. Nowadays, we look at that and we think, whoa, man, that's crazy. You know, that's way, way too young. But back then, it was completely normal. She was 11 years old when she got engaged to her husband. Her husband was the son of a baron, and the marriage was most likely a political arrangement, because that's how things were done back then with noble people, is you found other noble people to marry. And that caused quite a bit of inbreeding, as you can imagine. And that's probably why, and this is pure speculation, but that's probably why so many of these noble people throughout history, from Elizabeth Bathory to Vlad Tepes to Henry VIII, all of them are kind of crazy. They all kind of got a screw loose. I think it's partially the inbreeding, and it's partially probably that old saying of absolute power corrupts absolutely, to where if you have people telling you yes all the time and nobody ever tells you no, and you kind of rule everything, then you kind of get carried away and forget your place. And I think that probably had a little bit of something to do with it as well. The couple got married when she was 15 years old, so they were engaged for around 4 years. He was 19 at the time. They got married at the Palace of Verano on May 8th, 1575. There were 4,500 guests, somewhere in that range, that came to the wedding, and she moved to his castle, the Nadasdy Castle in Servar, and she spent the majority of her time by herself because her husband was off studying in Vienna. Nadasdy's wedding gift to Elizabeth Bathory was his household. The castle had been bought by his mother in 1569 and given to Nadasdy, who, when they got married, he transferred it over to his wife Elizabeth. They had the castle, they had a little country house, and then they had 17 villages around it that they were in control of. The castle was surrounded by those villages and different farmlands that the peasants would work. In 1578, Nadasdy became the chief commander of the Hungarian troops, and he led them into war against the Ottoman Empire. When her husband was at war, Elizabeth was kind of in charge of everything. She had to run all of the business affairs, all the estates. She was in charge of disciplining the peasants, of keeping order, but she was also, more importantly, was in charge of defending not only the castle, but all of the villages around it and all of the people that lived in those villages. So that's one thing that the nobility did, was they provided protection to the peasants who lived in their villages and served under them. That's one of the reasons why the peasants never really rose up that often, because they were given protection by the noble people, and they didn't have to worry too much about getting murdered by opposing armies and stuff like that. During the Long War, the threat to her castle was kind of significant because the village had been plundered by the Ottomans before. Elizabeth was up to the task because she was an educated woman. She could read and write in 4 different languages. She definitely had the ability and the propensity for cruelty and to be tough enough to handle the job. There were several instances where she intervened on behalf of destitute women, including a woman whose husband had been captured by the Turks, and another woman whose daughter was raped and impregnated. So she did have a softer side to her as well. Her child, Anna, was born in 1585, and she later became the wife of Nikola Zarinsky. And she had a bunch of other kids. I named them in the beginning. And back then, I mean, that was an important thing, because I don't know if you ever seen, like, you know, those shows on Henry VIII and other kings and stuff like that. You know that they're always looking for an heir. They're always trying to have children to carry on the title and carry on the lands. Her husband, Nadasdy, ended up dying on January 4th, 1604. He was 48 years old. He didn't die in battle like you would expect because he was at war. He actually died of illness, but history doesn't record what that illness was exactly. We don't know what killed him other than the fact that he got sick and died. But we know that he first got sick in 1601. And so it was an illness that lasted all the way to the beginning of 1604. So it was an ongoing long thing. And it began with debilitating pain in his legs. And it progressed from that point, as he never really got better. And in 1603, 1 year before he died, he actually became permanently disabled and couldn't really do much of anything anymore. At that point, the couple had been married for 29 years. And before he died, Nadasdy entrusted his heirs and his widow to Georgi Thurzo. Ironically enough, is actually the guy who would lead the investigation of Elizabeth Bathory's crime. Between 1602 and 1604, after the rumors of Elizabeth Bathory's atrocities had spread throughout the entire kingdom, a Lutheran minister ended up making complaints against her, not only in public but also in the court in Vienna. And the Hungarian authorities eventually responded. They didn't act on it right away. They kind of let it go for a while. It's kind of an interesting thing because the position that Elizabeth Bathory was in, like I said earlier, she was in charge of 17 villages that she ruled over. And she could pretty much do whatever she wanted with those 17 villages. Okay, she could punish them any way she liked. She could tax them any way she liked. She could pretty much do whatever she wanted to do. And she did. I mean, she was murdering these people at an alarming rate. And the way she would do it was she would have her people go out into the villages and to find beautiful young virgin women. Now, once they found these beautiful young virgin women, they would have them come to the castle and interview for the job of handmaiden. Once they came there thinking they were getting the job, and their family thought that these girls were going to the castle to work for the Countess and would be taken care of wonderfully, they didn't really expect the girls to come home because they would be living in the castle serving the Countess. So it was kind of the perfect setup because she could bring these girls in and she could do whatever she pleased and nobody was going to miss them, because as far as their families and the villagers thought, they were going to live in the castle to serve the Countess. And nobody in the castle was going to say anything. And even if somebody found out, who cares? They're peasants. That was kind of the way people thought back then. They didn't give a damn because these people didn't matter. They weren't nobility. They were just peasants. She first got that urge and that desire to kill because she kind of got bored. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. It's the truth. Being the Countess and being in charge, she could do whatever she wanted. Okay, she could have as many guys to have sex with her as she wanted. She could party as much as she wanted. She could drink. She could eat. She could do anything her heart desired. And she did. But eventually, all that stuff gets boring to you if you do it all the time. So she was bored out of her mind and looking for something to get into, looking for something to do that would excite her and make her happy. She started writing letters to her husband, who was off at war. He was a sadistic puppy too. They were both kind of sickos, and he was off torturing prisoners at the war, doing all kinds of horrific things to them. And she would write him letters and ask him to describe the tortures that he was doing. So he would write her back and he would say, you know, man, I'm doing all kinds of great stuff here. I'm jamming pins and needles underneath their fingernails and I'm tying them down and smearing them with honey and leaving them out, you know, on the ground to be attacked by bees or ants. And I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. And it kind of excited Elizabeth Bathory. And she started feeling alive again. She started feeling like she had a purpose again. So she started bringing these girls in and started trying out some of the tortures and some of the terrible, terrible things that her husband had been writing to her about. And once she started killing and torturing girls, she found that she really liked it. And she decided she was going to do more of it. And so that's how she really began this whole journey of killing. Her most famous thing, the thing that she's most famous for, is bathing in the blood of her victims. You've all heard that story about how she would be in the bathtub filled with the blood of the virgin women, and she would be bathing in it. Okay, that story is 100% true. She did that a lot. She not only bathed in the blood, but she drank the blood out of beautiful glasses, like little wine glasses, and she used the blood as like a beauty cream and smeared it all over her face and washed her hair with it, all that kind of stuff. The way that started was one time when she was torturing a handmaiden right before she killed her. Some blood had got on her hand, and it was on the back of her hand up near where her wrist area is, and she hadn't noticed it right away until it had started to dry up a little bit. And when she noticed it, you know, she wiped it really good and got it off of there. And she noticed that area of her hand where the blood had been laying was a lot softer and more supple than the skin around it. And she thought, wow, this stuff is like amazing. It'll make me younger. And that's what the whole bathing in blood thing was really all about. Was she believed by bathing in the blood of young virgin girls that it would actually keep her young. So she believed that she could live forever and stay young and beautiful by bathing in the blood, because the blood contained the essence of the girls. So that's why all of that came about, and that's why she did quite a bit of it. Now, where she kind of screwed up, okay, she could have kept on killing these villagers for a long time. I mean, she could have racked up numbers like 50, 60, 70,000, whatever, as many as she wanted over her lifetime, really. The only limit was the amount of people in the village. So basically, where she screwed up was she got bored with killing the peasants, and she moved on to a little bit richer taste, so to speak. She started killing nobility. She started low, obviously. You know, she didn't go after the king, but she started off killing dukes and duchesses and stuff like that, and those people started to disappear. She would invite them over, and then she would take them down to her torture chambers, and she would torture them and murder them. Now, nobody cared as far as anybody that could really do anything, you know, like the king or any of the high-ranking nobility. They didn't care when she was just killing villagers. When it was just little virgin girls from the village, little peasants that didn't matter, they could give a damn. They didn't care. Nobody missed them. I mean, their families would miss them if they found out what happened, but nobody that had any power missed them. Once she began killing nobility, then the king had to intervene. Okay, this happened around 1610. King Matthias, who was the king at the time, he intervened because basically Bathory had begun killing the daughters of the local noble people. In January of 1611, Bathory was put on trial, along with some of her co-conspirators, people that worked in the castle that helped her to get these girls, even though they were kind of following orders and doing what they were told to do, because they would have been killed if they didn't. But still, they were put on trial right alongside of her. And they put her on trial for 80 counts of murder. And she was actually convicted on every single count. But she did not get executed. They did not sentence her to execution. They sentenced everybody else that helped her to execution. But she didn't get sentenced to execution. She was confined to a room of the castle to live out the rest of her days. Basically, house arrest. Now, this sounds wonderful. This sounds like, well, man, that's not a punishment at all. That's no big deal, really. But the room that she was confined to was not like her bedroom. It was not, you know, the living room. She was confined to a room that only had little slits for air to come through and a slit for food to be passed through. And so that's where she spent the rest of her life. She lived there for over 3 years, but ended up dying in 1614 in August. They walked in and found her dead. There are a lot of different reasons why she could do the things that she did. Maybe she's just crazy. Maybe she got bored, like I was saying, and her husband was telling her about the tortures that he did, and she thought, hey, that sounds fun. Who knows? Some of the stuff she did was kind of normal, and then some of it was, well, not normal, but normal for psychopaths. And some of it was like beating the crap out of the servants, hitting them with red-hot pokers, pouring the honey on them, like I said, and tying them to trees in the woods so that wild animals would end up tearing them apart and eating them. They would have gypsies. She would take some of the village gypsies, and she would actually sew them up inside of dead horses, like Luke Skywalker did in Tatooine, like when he went into that thing. She did that to people. She would actually sew them inside of dead horses and leave them there, which I know sounds nuts, but it was actually a kind of a common punishment in the 16th century to do some of these things. Maybe not the sewing inside the dead horse thing, that's kind of extreme, but beating them with red-hot pokers and stuff like that was fairly normal. They got into all kinds of stuff. I mean, there was orgies going on. It was really like a Caligula kind of scene going on there at her castle. When people think about Elizabeth Bathory, and this is a common misconception that people have, they think of almost like a Puritan, like what you would imagine the Puritans to be in early America. That's kind of the way they see Elizabeth Bathory, like she's this noble person who is a goody-goody kind of person, other than the fact that she murders girls and bathes in their blood. Granted, that's not too goody-goody, but other than that, she's a stiff, no-nonsense, stern, serious kind of woman that just happens to kill people. And nothing really could be further from the truth. I mean, you had sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. That's what was going on there. I mean, there was a lot of drinking, there was a lot of partying, there was a lot of usage of any kind of substance that was available at the time. There was a lot of gluttony going on, a lot of overeating, wild sex orgies. There was a lot of S&M kind of stuff happening where she would, beat people and torture people. And I mean, it was out of control. It was like the craziest party you've ever been to in your life times 1,000, where you end up dead at the end. It was not what people normally picture when they think of Elizabeth Bathory. There's a lot of theories that are very, very interesting about Elizabeth Bathory. One of these theories is that she is one of the inspirations for the Dracula story. Now, we all know of Vlad Tepes, who is also known as Vlad Dracula, who was the original basis for the Dracula story. That's where the name came from. And a lot of people credit him as being the real-life Dracula. But a lot of people say that Elizabeth Bathory is even more like Dracula because she drank the blood. She bathed in the blood. Vlad Tepes, he drank the blood some too. He mainly liked to dip his bread in the blood and eat it. But she did a lot of stuff that correlates as well. Because that's one of the theories, is that she was the origin of that. Another theory is that she was actually a real-life vampire, that she was a real vampire. Not just the inspiration, but an actual vampire. Historically, there's no real evidence that for either. There's similarities. There's things that make you go, maybe. But history-wise, there's no real concrete evidence that I can point to say yes to either one of those questions. Now, circumstantially, plenty. There have been a few really, really bad female serial killers. But I think Elizabeth Bathory is by far the most badass of them all. I mean, she really is. She kind of really takes the cake. Because not only did she set the bar insanely high, but the cruelty that she used. I mean, I told you about the red hot pokers and all that kind of stuff, but that's not even the worst of it. I mean, that was the tame stuff that she did. She would actually bite off hunks of flesh from you while you were alive and chew them up. Sometimes swallow, sometimes spit them out, depending on her mood, I guess. She would take red hot needles and jam them up underneath your fingernails, all the way up as far as she could take it up in it, until literally your fingernail would have so much heat and pressure built up underneath of it that it would pop off. And sometimes the fingernail would pop off and fly several feet in the air and land somewhere else. Now just imagine how bad that would hurt. I mean, that would be horrifying. She would cut strips of flesh off of the bodies and do all kinds of crazy stuff with them. Keep in mind, all this stuff is going on while the victim is still alive and breathing. There was all kinds of weird experiments that she was doing at the time with these people. Not only was she doing torturous things to them, like seeing how much pain they could endure before they died, slicing them apart, things like that. She started, like I said, with the drinking and the partying and the orgies and the wild behavior, and grew bored. She was looking for more. She was looking for more excitement, something that made her feel alive. So she started getting into the torturing and then the killing. And at first that was fine. That worked. That fixed it. And then it wasn't enough anymore, and she needed more. It started with the drinking of the blood, the bathing in the blood, those kind of things. And at first that was enough. And then it wasn't, and she needed more. And then she began eating the flesh. And all those other things that she was doing, it just kept progressing. And I think it finally reached a point that she had done everything that she could think of doing to these villagers. There was nothing left to do to peasants that she hadn't already done. At least not in her mind. She couldn't think of anything new to try. So she decided that she needed more. So she thought, what would be more exciting? What would be more risky? What would be more, adrenaline filled and exhilarating? I'll start getting some of these noble people. That's much bigger risk. That's much more exciting than a lowly peasant. They're barely more than an animal. So she started going after the nobility. And once she started going after the nobility, then is when people started to go, hey, wait a minute. What the hell's going on here? I sent my daughter to go visit with the Countess, and all of a sudden I ain't seen her no more. She ain't been back. Where's she at? And the Countess say, I don't know where she went. She left. That kind of thing started going on. Finally, when they had a suspicion that something really wasn't right and something was really going wrong, the priest had made accusations and charges against her, then they actually showed up. A force of the nobility showed up at her place, at her castle. They just barged in. And when they entered the place, they found her covered in blood and in the middle of torturing somebody. And there was blood and guts and gore everywhere. It looked like a horror movie in there. It was horrifyingly bad. And it was so bad that they actually recorded when they were talking about it. They wrote that it was too terrible to even describe. So you can only imagine the scene that these people walked into. Because remember, these are not snowflakes, okay? These are not, little privileged teenagers or something that, from our time, that sit around and play Xbox all day and don't know anything. That's not what these people were, man. These are soldiers. These people have been to war. These people have hacked off body parts themselves of the enemy. They've been, ankle deep in rivers of blood as they're fighting these battles. So these are battle-hardened people. Okay, these are tough people. These are not little soft people that would be shocked at the sight of a drop of blood. These are people that are used to this kind of thing. And they went into her castle to finally find out once and for all what the hell was going on. And the scene that they walked into was too horrible for them to describe. So that really, really tells you that it was bad. And it was not just bad. It was damn bad. In a lot of aspects, she never really had a chance. And the reason I say that is because from the very beginning, she was surrounded by horrible things. She was not raised up in a normal Christian home where everybody went to church and everybody was happy and loving and good and all that kind of stuff. She just wasn't. When she was being raised up, her family was into the occult. There was Satanism, there was witchcraft, and she actually experimented with witchcraft and Satanism herself in her life. Early on in her life, that's what she was exposed to. For her uncle and for her aunts, they were Satanists and witches, and that's the kind of stuff that she grew up thinking was normal or right. She was actually a Christian, supposedly, but she also dabbled in witchcraft and Satanism. She was very interested, and she practiced both of those as well. So when you take that into consideration, and you take into consideration the fact that she was basically given a life of privilege and unlimited power over the peasants in the villages that she was in charge of. And on top of that, there was no consequences for her. No matter what she did, she didn't get punished. No matter how bad it was, she didn't get punished. She would do this thing and got away with it. So then she would do a little bit worse and got away with it. And it reached a point to where she believed that she could do anything. That she was kind of above the law. That nobody cared. She was the boss here. And nobody was going to tell her she couldn't do anything. There was nobody to stop her. The only person that could stop her was the king, and he didn't give a damn. And so she believed that she could just run roughshod over everybody and do anything she felt like doing. And once she had reached that point, and she started going after the nobles' daughters, at this point, there would be no talking her out of it. There was no stopping her at this point. And to where she was really relying on that blood. because she believed it was keeping her young, and she would bathe in the blood. And then whenever she would see a wrinkle or, a gray hair or something that was a sign of aging, to her, that wasn't a sign that the blood was not working, that it was silly, that she wasn't being kept young. She did more. And she kept killing and killing and killing, and it got to the point where she thought, if peasant blood kept me young for this long, what happens if I use noble blood? It's much stronger blood. It's noble blood. So most likely it'll do much better for me, and it'll make me live even longer. Maybe it'll even turn me into a young woman again instead of just keep me the age I am. So in her mind, she's got this psychosis going on. She's got this weird thought pattern going. And so she was almost had to start taking nobles in order to keep that youth that she wanted. You know what I mean? Even though there's no real reason to believe that it was working for her. Now I say that, but it's interesting because that practice still goes on today. That practice of using the blood of the young to keep the old alive and young is actually still done by the elites today. They're not bathing in the blood today, but they are doing it through blood transfusions. The way this works is an old person will go into a hospital and they'll bring in a young volunteer, somebody who's being paid for this, and they will take the young person's blood and put it into the old person. And that'll last you sometimes up to a month, several weeks up to a month sometimes, to where you will feel a lot better and you will feel rejuvenated and you'll feel young. You won't look young, you'll still look old, but you'll feel a lot better than you did before. They've even been able to keep people alive that have diseases that would ordinarily kill them through these blood transfusions. So it's kind of interesting to me that we look at Elizabeth Bathory today like she was this monster. And she was. I mean, no doubt about it. But one of the reasons that we look at it as so horrible was because of the whole bathing in the blood thing to keep her young. That aspect of it is what makes her stand out. It's what makes her so freaky. And we think, God, that's horrible, man. Because we get the picture of her sitting in the tub with blood smeared all over her and everything, right? That's terrible. But almost the same thing is happening now, and nobody bats an eye. Because all the blood is contained in tubes and it's going into the arm, it's not being smeared all over the body and everything. We look at that nowadays and we don't think anything of it. We think, crazy elites, they do dumb things, no worries. But we don't think of it as a horrifying event like we think of what Elizabeth Bathory did. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong either way. I'm just saying that's very interesting to me. So I've given you the basic history, and I'm going to throw over to Old Boy, and he's got some interesting stuff about Elizabeth Bathory to talk about, and then we'll do a little bit of comparisons with whether or not she was a vampire and try to figure this out. Go ahead, Old Boy, take it away, brother.
Another thing about what you were saying about her being the Brad Stoker story, there is a lot of similarities to Dracula, but the problem is you got to remember the Dracula story. You know how his wife killed herself, and he came back for her. So that part's where they say there's an argument on it, because remember, he goes crazy and betrays God, and 100 years later thinks he sees her again, but there's parts that he might have got from Elizabeth. What I know about her, it wasn't just her servants. Her oldest daughter was helping her kill these girls too. From the ages of 10 to 15, she would not only take their blood and swim in them, like basically swim in their blood, and bathing in it. They would rape, torture, eat, just do all kinds of nasty stuff to these girls. And her daughter was involved in it too. And they were into Satanism and now coming to find out witchcraft. I didn't know that part. You also know that about when you were talking about her husband, you know that she didn't take his name either. You know that, right, James?
Yes, because the reason why was because she had a higher station than he did. She was higher ranked nobility, so she kept the Bathory name. You're absolutely right.
Supposedly she came back to life in 1619, 5 years after she died, and people started dying. Do I think she was a vampire, or do I think it was a story? Might have been, might have not been. Just like I said, folklore, people like to tell, around the campfire. Back then, they didn't have TVs like me and James have. They talk like we are right now about stories and stuff, and people would exaggerate them and get them worse than they were, and that's. I think that she was a cannibal. I think she had a lust for blood, but I don't know. She might have been a vampire because some of the stuff she did was pretty gruesome, and it was all blood and drinking blood and showering in blood and even eating blood, eating body parts and raping. But she was also a lesbian, they're saying, too. She liked women. That's the other thing. She liked having sex with women. Not trying to get too graphic, but she liked, in the sick thing, she liked little teenagers and young preteens. So she also liked to rape these women too, these girls. Sorry, I wouldn't even say they're women, preteens, and some were teens, but would torture them in heinous ways. Like he said, open up their stomach, pretty much bathe in their blood. Like he said, got that device which she would basically take a blood shower out of while this poor girl was getting cut up. She had no respect for any kind of humanity. She killed around 650 to 1,250 people or more. There was an argument about that one. It could even be more than that. So, what do I think she is? I think she was a witch, probably a blood mage. She did a lot of witchcraft with blood, and back then, a lot of Satanists did a lot of things with people's bodies. They're supposedly, if you've seen that movie Witch, they used to take babies and use the baby fat, think they could be immortal. There's all kinds of stories about that. And Satanists used to sacrifice people. I think she just went blood stalking crazy, didn't care because she thought she could get away with everything, and just didn't care about life anymore. And that's what a lot of people do. They get power and then just want more and more. Do I think she was a vampire? There's a possibility. If she, there's stories of her coming back to life. They can't find her in the grave. So that and there's stories of recently, up to about 50 years ago, they said somebody claims they saw her, or something similar to her. So I don't know. It's a pretty detailing story. I don't know. I think she might be a vampire. I don't know. What do you think, James?
There's an interesting historical perspective here as well to the story of her coming back to life. During that time period, there was a lot of that going on, because what would happen is you would have bad weather, you would have droughts, and you would have times where there was infestations of different insects like locusts and stuff like that would destroy the crops. Or there was years where the crops just wouldn't come in very well because you would have a really, really late frost or something like that. And so, being superstitious people, what they thought was that there was a vampire that was screwing everything up. Or they would have a plague come through where a lot of their kids were getting sick and dying. So they would say, well, somebody must be coming back from the dead and killing our kids at night. They're drinking their blood and killing them. And, that's the way they thought. So historically, what they did was they started digging people up that had recently died, and they would put a stake through their heart and they would decapitate the corpse, and then they would burn it. And once they did all three of those things, if they had the right person, then the theory was that whatever the affliction was that was taking place in the community, it would stop. So if it was the crops were failing, then the crops would stop failing. If it was that the young people were dying, then the young people would stop dying because they got the right person. If whatever it was that they were trying to stop continued, that didn't mean in their minds they were wrong about the whole thing and it was a dumb idea to dig up corpses and do all that to them. In their mind, they thought, okay, well, we just didn't get the right person yet. It must not have been old Jed over there. It must have been Wilma. Wilma's the one that's doing it, so let's go dig Wilma up, and we're going to put a stake in her heart, cut her head off, and set her on fire. So I think that might be where that legend comes from with Elizabeth Bathory. The reason they did those things is because they claimed the people were vampires and they were affecting their community after death. So the legend was already there that Elizabeth Bathory might be a vampire because of the blood drinking, the flesh eating, and the bathing in blood. So that story might have come about because of something that was going on, whether it be a sickness or whether it be a serial killer that was operating in the area who was killing people, and they thought, okay, that's Elizabeth Bathory, must be doing that. Let's go dig this chick up and let's take care of her so she doesn't do it anymore. You know what I mean? It very well could have been something along those lines that caused that. There's some very interesting correlations between the vampire legend and the story of Elizabeth Bathory. The first obvious one is the blood. Okay, she drank the blood. Vampires drink the blood. That's easy. She bathed in the blood. Okay, but the interesting thing about the blood to me is the idea that the blood will give her youth. The blood will turn back the hands of time, make her young again. Basically, the blood is giving her immortality. And we know that vampires are immortal because they drink blood. So that's an interesting little correlation between the real life story of Elizabeth Bathory and the legends and lore of the vampire. Some of the other kind of things that are similar is the level of viciousness and butchery that Elizabeth Bathory showed, and then the level of viciousness and butchery that vampires show. Now, I'm not talking about Twilight vampires. I'm not talking about the sparkly guys that go out in the sun and play and have fun. I'm not even really talking about Dracula here, because Dracula was an aristocrat, which also ties in with Elizabeth Bathory, because she was nobility, she was a countess, and Bram Stoker's Dracula was a count, okay? Countess, count. Just the male counterpart of the Countess. So that's another correlation there between the two. The original vampires in lore were not sophisticated. They were not suave and sexy and, cool. They were none of those things. The original vampires were hideous, they were scary as hell, and they were vicious. They would not only drink your blood, but they would rip you apart to get to it, and they would eat some of you in the process. Okay, so the original vampires from lore are not what the vampires have evolved into in fiction by the time of Dracula. So there's a correlation between the actual legends of vampires and Elizabeth Bathory as well. Also, the idea that she feeds on the blood like a vampire feeds on the blood, and she feeds on the blood of young girls, okay, of the young, of youth. That's another kind of a wink and a nod at immortality and turning back the hands of time. Because she's not going after just anybody. She's going after the young because she believes that the young, their blood will be able to make her young.
I think, just to let you know, is another theory I have, is once again, she was a countess, so she probably was involved with the Illuminati or some kind of group like them. And this is where I'm coming to. And this is where everybody's going to have to realize this is what I'm coming to on all this stuff. With all these murders and all these weirdo people who do all this nasty stuff. The real goal is they don't want to die. And I think that's been people's obsession for life, to never die. And I think that's what they do some of this crap for. They believe they're going to live forever, or they don't want to grow old. They get obsessed with living forever, or they think they're going to get some kind of power out of this, and the devil is going to give them what they really want, because God's not going to let you live forever. God's not going to give you what you want. You can't just kill somebody and just get away with it. But if you do it with the devil, you can, and that gives you an excuse to do whatever you want. And I think that's why all this stuff happens, because I think people are so scared of dying, they want to find a way to live forever. And I believe some of this stuff happens. I think also it happens because people are just crazy too, or they just don't care for humanity. When you kill about 20 people, after a while you don't care anymore. It becomes like killing a cockroach. And the way I think it with her is the way she's killed so many people. That's crazy. I mean, thousands of people. I just think that's what they know of. That's crazy, because think about it. She would have to kill that many people because she basically took a bath every other day or something in blood. So she would have to kill so many people because, every person you kill, because eventually blood starts smelling and it goes bad. And she was drinking and eating it. And, you could get sick because, not all these peasants were probably disease free. You had a lot of girls that probably had sickness. Like back then you had a lot of what do they have? Measles. They had chicken pox. They had influenza. I don't know how to say that word. You know what I'm getting into. The Black Plague, influenza, and then you had mumps. You had blood diseases like hepatitis. They had hepatitis back then. I don't know if they had AIDS yet. No. But they had gonorrhea. They had all kinds of syphilis. They didn't have gonorrhea there? I thought they did.
No, they didn't have AIDS back then.
But
AIDS came about in the early 80s.
Yeah, no, they didn't have AIDS. Yeah, 80s. Okay. You got to remember, back then, you were getting married at 12, 13 years old, like James said. And some of these girls probably got taken advantage of, either sold for prostitution or something bad happened to them. Drinking blood is not good for you. Some people, there's arguments about that. Some people say eating organs, and cannibals claim to make you younger and make you stronger. That was some of the rumors on that, like, Hannibal Lecter used to say. But you can't drink blood. I used to be a dialysis technician. I went to school. I worked in the field for 5 or 6 years. The process is I saw blood. I worked with blood. You stuck somebody onto a machine because their kidneys no longer work or function right. And you run the blood through a machine. And you run it back through an artificial kidney because that's how your kidneys get clean. Blood can have hepatitis. Now we had AIDS. We didn't even mess with it if somebody had HIV or AIDS. They got thrown. They used a different kidney every time, a new kidney. In a fake kidney, it looks like it's like a pipe, but it's huge and fat and has fibers in it and stuff. It just like it would be like a regular kidney, just doesn't look like it. It's just like it looks like it's kind of weird. It looks like remember that movie? What is it? Ghostbusters? Kind of something like that. It looks like it would be like out of a movie or something, but it's a kidney and you run fibers and they clean your blood. But drinking blood's not good for you. You could die from that. You're not supposed to really consume human body parts either. You can get diseases. So that's where it's hard to believe that she was human, because eventually she would have got sick. Because like I said, there was not too many medicines back then, and people weren't too clean then. You can get a lot of diseases. And that's another thing with Vlad the Impaler, that he could have been a vampire because there was something's going on, because you would get something eventually. Especially that many people you've killed. Not like 10 or like Jeffrey Dahmer, we killed like 10 or 12 or something. This and ate a couple. These people really killed people, like thousands, and did really awful things, drinking blood, swimming in them, bathing. Even that, you said she was rubbing like a compound, and that's it?
No, she would like rub the blood into
that's kind of crazy. I mean,
into her face and body. Like women do with facial cream now.
Oh, okay.
And stuff like that. She would use it as a lotion almost, like a face cream, and rub it in.
Oh, okay. Well, that right there, rubbing blood in your eyes is not good. That's like the easiest way to get hepatitis or some kind of. Back then, what was the plague? What else was out then? You probably know about this. What was the big thing that people died from?
The main one was the bubonic plague.
Meningitis and stuff like that. Yeah, bubonic plague. Back then, somebody would have had it out of all these people, and she didn't die, so that should tell you something. Either the witchcraft was keeping her alive, and trust me, people, me being a witch, and that's a whole nother story, but she was doing stuff for the devil and witchcraft. That's probably why she was living, because she wasn't just drinking the blood. She was probably doing blood sacrifices. And what happened is she just went crazy and just didn't care. And she started killing nobles and stuff like that. But originally she just was killing, regular peasant girls. And her daughter was helping her, and she had a gang of people would go and kill them. I believe that he's probably right. If this day and age that she would have the equipment, she probably would have done it that way. She probably would have hooked her body up and killed these girls. She would have still killed them. I think she would have just drained their blood. But it would have been not as bad. But you never know. She was eating people too, so it just wouldn't have been as messy. She probably would have had somebody cook up some leg and body. I don't know what the hell she was doing, head, whatever she was eating, and she would have ate it. So I mean, I don't think it would have really mattered, James. I think that more to it. She just was. it wouldn't have been as messy. I kind of agree with you on that. So basically, you're right. Yeah, I got to agree with you on that. I think, but what do you think? She was a vampire?
That's a hard question to answer because it really boils down to whether we believe vampires even exist. Now, there's the vampires of legend that are the bloodsuckers that can turn into bats, that whole thing, that old gag. Do I think she was that? No, because I don't think that actually exists. There's also a thing called clinical vampirism, and there's psychic vampirism. Those are real things, where a psychic vampire feeds off the life force and the energy of somebody, their psychic energy, and that's a real thing. Do I think she could have been doing a little bit of that? Possibly. I mean, maybe she was feeding off the fear and the pain and suffering of her victims. Maybe she got something from that. Most likely not, but it's possible. And then there's clinical vampirism, which basically what that is just somebody who drinks blood. Somebody who has a mental illness that believes that they're a vampire and that they drink blood. She fits that bill. Now, whether she believed she was a vampire or not, I doubt she believed she was a vampire. I know she drank blood, so she kind of fits that bill a little bit. I think more likely than her being a vampire, the likely thing is that she was a witch and a Satanist, which we know is true. That's historical. That's fact. She was also a Lutheran, but she dabbled in Satanism, and she grew up with witchcraft, and her advisors were witches. So we know that she was doing witchcraft. So most likely what I think it was blood sacrifice, exactly what you said. I think she was doing blood sacrifice to try to gain years on her life and youth and beauty. And I think that mixed in with that was just a woman who had started off a little bit psychotic and a little bit of a sick puppy. You know, her and her husband were both sick puppies. But I think it evolved over time into full-blown psychosis. I mean, I think she was out of her damn mind in layman's terms. I think that it went on for so long that it just got worse and worse and worse, because that's what happens in these things, man. You know, with regular serial killers, they start out killing bugs, and then they move up from bugs to like small animals like squirrels or rabbits or kittens, and then they move from that to dogs and bigger animals, and eventually they graduate to humans. And when they start killing humans, it'll be a human every couple years they have to kill in order to satisfy that urge, and then it starts to progress to where they have to kill more and more often, and then it gets to be where they're having to kill almost every day, and that's when they always get caught, because they can't keep it up for that long without doing something stupid and making a dumb mistake that leaves them open to being caught. And that's exactly what happened with Elizabeth Bathory. It's that exact same pattern. It's the classic pattern of every serial killer, almost every serial killer ever, where the urge gets to where it's overwhelming, it's more and more, and they have to keep doing it. They have to do it more often, they have to do it bigger, they have to do it better, they have to do it better, and that's what gets them caught, because they get sloppy. And that's exactly what happened with her. She got sloppy. She got too full of herself. She thought she was invincible. She thought she could do anything and nobody could stop her. She started killing nobles. That pissed off the people in power, and they came down and they got her ass. That's what happened. If she would have been satisfied to kill peasants and just continue being the evil witch that she was and killing peasants, nobody would have said anything. She probably could have lived her life out. She could have probably racked up 25, 30, 40, 50, 60,000, whatever. However many people she could get would be how many she could kill. You know, however many villagers she actually had and peasants that were in the area would be the amount of people that she could kill if she would have stuck to them. But it wasn't enough. That old thrill, it wasn't there anymore with peasants. It got to the point to where she had to do better. And then she had, on top of that, she had this mania going about her looks, this vanity, to where she wanted to be young and beautiful again. So she was willing to kill to get it. And she honestly believed that the blood of the young would make her young again herself and make her beautiful. As she got older, it got worse, because more wrinkles started to appear, more gray hair started to appear. So she believed she had to kill more. You know, she had to bathe more in blood. She had to do more things to combat time. Then eventually she moved on to nobles because she was told that noble blood was purer and stronger and it would work better. I think those things were what drove her. I don't believe that Elizabeth Bathory was a real life vampire. Maybe in the clinical sense, but as far as like the creature that turns into a bat and has the cape and says, "I want to suck your blood," rubah, I don't believe that even exists. Clinical vampire, I think she fits that bill. Psychopath, I think she fits that bill. I'm not going to call her a sociopath because she has emotion, she has feeling, you know what I mean? So she doesn't really fit that bill. But I think we can sum it up basically. She was evil and she killed because she liked it. You know, she killed because it was necessary for what she needed to make herself young, and also because she just really, really dug it. And I think that's the bottom line. That's what it really boils down to.
I'm going to go ahead and agree to a point, but I think it's possible for anything. But I want to give a shout out to everybody who listens, to all our listeners, to all our fans, all the people who promote us. Love you all.
Thank you very much for everything. We love you. We appreciate your support. And until we meet again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. Bye-bye, everybody. I am horror author James Hershey Jr. from the Staring Into the Abyss radio show. Check out the book that started it all, what critics called the scariest book of the year. I am Legion. And if you're still breathing, check out the other 2 books in the series, The Surrogate of Souls and The Rise of the Revenant. These books will scare the hell out of you. That I promise.